Hello everyone and welcome back to Let's Play Banjo-Kazooie. In the last part we explored all of Treasure Trove Cove and got all of the jiggies within it in the process, and now we're back in Gruntilda's lair to go find the painting for and then ultimately find and explore our third world. But before we actively go after that, come up here for the jiggy we got from the Witch Switch within Treasure Trove Cove itself. Worth noting that the first several jiggies like this we find in the game from the Witch Switches are usually placed right next to the entrance to the world in question. But as we go further into the game, there's going to often be more steps involved in getting the Witch Switch jiggy after you leave the level in question. In specific, the ones towards the mid-game, there's quite a few more steps involved. So we already have 200 notes, so I could theoretically go open that door and head over towards what's effectively meant to be the 4th and 5th world beyond. But I want to do things in order, so we're going to head back here towards where the early portion of the game was, towards Mumbo Mountain, like. And now that we can use the shock jump pads, we can come up here and find the puzzle for the third world. And they introduce a very quick tutorial here as well. If you want to place all your pieces into the picture, just press Z. Why they don't tell you that at minimum at the second painting, I don't know, but not a big deal. That opens up that grate right there, and now we can access World 3, Clanker's Cavern. So Treasure Trove Cove, while it is water-themed, isn't technically the water level for the game. I'd argue it's Clanker's Cavern at large, although not for nothing. While largely every single world has some amount of water you can actively swim and thus drown in, Banjo-Kazooie does feel like it has an inordinately large amount of water-themed levels outright, because let's see, Treasure Trove Cove, we can count that one. Clanker's Cavern's gonna be one. And the second to last world at large is also, by most accounts, a water level. So about a third of this game's main levels are technically water levels, so how that gels with you will depend on the individual. Beak bombing that switch raises those two pipes in such a way that we can actively now reach the level in question. There is something else in this room, but I'm gonna save on dealing with that until after Clanker's Cavern, as it just flows better at that point. I like this next level. With that said, compared to Treasure Trove Cove, this is definitely more of a love it or hate it type of scenario. Just the one to move to find this time, but it's hidden well. Technically, it is arguably the best hidden move in the game. With that said, best hidden doesn't really say a lot, as if you just explore around any given entrance you find in this game, you'll probably find all the power-ups pretty easily. Now, the first thing I want to do is come around here to actively get above the entrance to grab an extra life, as well as some notes.
Lucky you! I'm an invulnerability feather. Bottles will tell you more.
Gee, I wonder what is potentially the currency used for the new power-up in this specific level. I can't think of anything. So this level is also where they start throwing these enemies at us that just jump at us from out of the sewer grates in the wall. Not for nothing, those enemies come out in such a speed where if you're not already attacking when they show up, you're probably going to get hit. With that said, there is a pretty consistent way to actively defeat the enemy without getting damaged, and that is while you're approaching it and about to be in front of it, jump and do the attack with Kazooie, because that hitbox will be going when it spawns in and will kill it before it can damage you. Oh god, oh god. Got a little bit of butterfingers there. Let's just jump cut back up there. Sometimes the camera in this game can be a little awkward. It's largely cooperative, but like with a lot of other N64 games, it does largely only move in set angles. I'm not even sure if the Xbox version's actually changed that. I'll need to look into that in post. With that said, that's also partially why they gave you the control where you can press R just to swing the camera directly behind Banjo, as that does give you a little more rein on which way you're looking. With that said, the camera itself will still get caught up on certain walls, so there's sometimes you just gotta look at a weird angle to figure out the platforming from there. And they're not super common, but when they happen, they definitely stick out. Now, if there's any level you should get used to holding down the R button to have finer control in water, it's this one. With that said, time to meet the key NPC of Clanker's Cavern.
I am Clanker, witch's garbage grinder. Clanker not like dirty water, want fresh air.
Meet Clanker. He looks threatening, but he's actually kind of a sweetheart. He actively will never harm you outright. I say outright because there's technically ways involving him that can damage you, but that largely either comes down to drowning in the water or certain other things we'll talk about later on. Your first destination here in Clanker's Cavern can be one of a couple of different things, but in order to access a lot of other jiggies and notes outright, we need to swim down here towards where the chain that's keeping him down is. and the music gets weirdly intense down here.
Hi, I'm Gloop. Grab my bubbles if you're low on air.
Gloop will drop bubbles similarly to the bubbles from Sonic. That'll just fill your air meter by, I think, at least 3 or 4 honeycomb pieces. You do want to grab the notes here at a bit of an odd pace, because you maybe want to place yourself in such a way where you're either just ahead or just behind Gloop at all times, just so you can pick up any air bubbles they spawn in as soon as you might need them. Because if you're potentially halfway away from him and you're just going in weird directions as you swim because of the momentum from, say, Kazooie's swimming specifically, it's easy to miss a bubble and potentially lose a life here. Oh, I haven't even talked about that. While largely you can see Jinjos pretty clearly in the map, in the case they're behind something or your camera's facing the wrong direction, they do frequently whistle when you're nearby to try and get your attention, so keep that in mind if you're having trouble finding one. Our main goal down here at the bottom is the key on this giant anvil. We need to swim through it from any direction 3 times to release the lock and give Clanker some of the fresh air he so desires. If you don't use the R button trick that greatly increases your turn, decreases your turn radius, I guess, actually, this can be kind of rough because the camera's just a little weirdly uncooperative with the anvil in specific, but using the R button to increase your agility around here goes a long way. There you go, Clanker. Get your eyes and all that above the water. Enjoy some fresh air. You're still in the shit water, but, you're in less of it, I guess.
Clanker has fresh air. You find reward on Clanker's back.
Thank you, Clanker. That's, Jiggy 1 of 10. Now, actively, I do forget to do this for a little bit, but I'm not too far away from one of the honeycomb pieces. Depending on which angle you actively swim up to get onto Clanker to grab the Jiggy from, you might even see it, is the way I'll put it for right now. Clanker does slowly rise and fall with the waves in the water, which does slightly limit at which point you can get on certain platforms, but only just. If anything, it actively more limits when you can jump onto his back with a backflip and then use the talon truck to crawl around here. With Clanker now having surfaced, we can access a vast majority of the rest of the level, because a good chunk of it just isn't if you don't have him up.
Clanker's teeth hurt now. Eat too much garbage. Help Clanker.
He's so sad and cute, I need to help him. So, the directions you can go to do other things in this level are either underwater, up into the rafters surrounding the upper walls of the cavern itself, or we can deal with Clanker's teeth and help him that way. But the first thing I'm going to do is get onto the screw that's in his blowhole and ride it up like an elevator to climb this really precarious pipe to grab the next Jiggy. Not for nothing, this is actually one of the easier levels when it comes to potential fall damage, as, not for nothing, Banjo-Kazooie does a lot for making its levels be very vertical from the start. And while you'll suffer fall damage if you fall a good distance and hit the ground, when you hit the water, you will never suffer any fall damage, period. So, Clanker's teeth. If you look at Clanker face on, he has 2 golden teeth, 1 on each side of his mouth. We can stand on these 2 platforms that are here and aim eggs at them, upon hitting each tooth with 3 eggs, they will fall down, and that quest will be completed of sorts. With that said, aiming here is definitely a little awkward, both because aiming with the eggs is awkward to begin with, but also because while he moves with the water's motions, he also moves forward and back a little bit, and aiming this can just be kind of annoying. Which, mind you, I can't think of many games, 3D platformer or first-person shooter or otherwise, prior to like the late PS1, early GameCube PS2 generation, where aiming projectiles isn't kind of weird and annoying, outside of specifically the N64 Zeldas, which that's a combination of there being 2 different aiming modes, and also, when you're mainly aiming, you're aiming in first person and you can't move, so half the issues are removed. Compare that to Banjo-Tooie, for instance, with its first person segments and, So, upon knocking down the tooth on the right side of Clanker's face, his right in specific, you can find a Jiggy on the golden tooth, but you can go into the other tooth as an entrance as well to the inside of Clanker for a Mumbo token, which I'm going to take advantage of because Mumbo tokens, there's plenty of them in the game, especially in the final world, but for the pace you find them in the early game, you do start running low compared to the price of Mumbo's later transformations. But yeah, the main 3 parts of Clanker's Cavern are above water, below water, or in Clanker himself. This weird biomechanical Jabba Jabba's belly has not much of threat in it, though there are these vines you really can't destroy. I guess they're technically parasites more than anything. The largest source of annoyance here in, I guess at this point, Clanker's stomach is the main Jiggy here. We're gonna hop through this green hoop, and now we have about 50 seconds to go through all the hoops as they turn green. Now, as long as you just hold down the B button when you're underwater with Kazooie alongside holding R to increase your turning, you can do the underwater hoops pretty easily. It's when you need to transfer from underwater to above water or vice versa where you might slow down enough and have to reposition yourself enough where you might lose track of yourself and maybe lose the timer. And I genuinely don't remember what happens if you run out of the timer. I'm assuming the hoops just spawn back in and you have to do it again, but they might kill you. It wouldn't be too unsurprising in this game if they just do that outright. There's a couple times they just make you take damage, though. Even unsuccessful runs, though, this timer is always kind of strict. As you can see here, we're finishing up with about 5-6 seconds remaining, if not less. Yeah, we're down to 2. I finished that with 1 remaining. I think I finished it at most with maybe 5. Doing all that makes the stomach acid, I guess, rise up, and we can now reach the Jiggy here at the top. But doing this also allows you to access another passageway. You may have noticed earlier while I was swimming around, there's a passage to the side of the area with some notes in it. There's one both low in the water, but by default there's also one that's higher up that the water cannot reach until you've done this. This also allows us to reach a flight pad as we can fly around in here to get something else. Now, worth noting, my end goal in here is one more Jiggy tied to something else in the area, but there's no exit from Clanker tied to that specifically. Meanwhile, both of these note pathways I'm exploring right now lead to exits. In specific, they lead to exiting via Clanker's gills. I would recommend waiting at least taking one of these pathways until you've done the other thing in here, more just for a streamlining kind of deal. But that said, worth noting, if you go out this way, make sure you swim all the way down this little ravine right here on the side of Clanker, as the pink Jinjo is down here for this specific world. Jinjo placements are iffy in this game because very often they're just kind of to the side or directly out in the open. But every now and then you get one like that where the camera is trickily placed enough where it's very easy to miss them. There's one in specific in the second to last world I actively missed for a good bit of my playthrough of that level until I backtracked to get it later on in the recording. Mostly because I completely forgot that it was in there. Because when I practiced this game for the LP, I reliably practiced like the first 5-6 worlds, but the last 2 or 3 I was largely going off memory, but that's also partially because practicing the levels in the early game is easy, they're smaller. But by end game, when the final world is potentially over an hour long without deaths and having to redo things, practice becomes a little less appealing. This move uses Biko's wings as a shield against the bad guys. Cool. Does it make me invulnerable? Sure does. Hold Z and press the right C button. Keep Z held and use the control stick to move around. Use it wisely though, as this move requires gold feathers, and you can only carry 10 of them. Here, take these 5 valuable gold feathers with you. You've learned all my new moves for this world. The rest is up to you. Meet the reason we got a golden feather earlier, the Wonder Wing. When using this, you are completely invulnerable to everything except for what are otherwise instant death hazards like bottomless pits. Hazards, enemies, the like, you'll just charge right on through them and take no damage. With that said, you need gold feathers to use it. They're kind of rare compared to everything else in the game, and you eat through them at about a rate of 1 every 1.5 seconds, 2 seconds. So it's very easy to run out of feathers if you really decide to spam that. I only tend to use it in like 3 or 4 distinct locations because it does make certain combat challenge jiggies pretty easy, but it depends on what you're doing. With that said, with a certain other bonus we'll be talking about later in the LP, it's definitely a lot more useful. I tend to just not use it too much though. With that, we're most of the way done with the interior of Clanker's body, but there's still one more thing we can do in there, but we need to use a different entrance to reach it. On top of that, I really recommend getting Wonder Wing before doing this, but you can theoretically go and do it before getting it. It just makes it a lot safer in the grand scheme of things. In specific, we rode the screw up from the blowhole earlier in this part, but you can also fall down while the bolt is in midair to reach a hidden room within his skull. This is also where the witch switch is, so if you're getting every Jiggy anyway, you gotta come in here for 2 reasons. That raises the eyeballs on that platform of Gruntilda's face in the room where the painting for this level even was. Use Wonder Wing, you can charge through these specific saw blades and get your next Jiggy. You can theoretically get through that room without Wonder Wing. It's a lot easier to do that there than it is in the room where you get Wonder Wing itself even. But I always tend to get Wonder Wing first just so I can completely ignore the mechanic in that room. With that, now we're done with the interior of Clanker, so we can head back outside and investigate the waters below him and the air above him to find the remaining notes, Jiggies, and the like in this world. And theoretically, I could recommend doing some of the ones underwater before the ones inside of Clanker, outside of getting the Wonder Wing. If only because this is probably the first level where dying and losing notes feels like a real punishment in the N64 release. As swimming in this game takes long enough, we're getting from one end of him to the other on top of having to redo certain puzzles for Jiggies in the case you died in a certain space. Really can make traversal here tedious. By climbing on the tail fin of Clanker, we can get up to this platform with all these red feathers, and there's a Jiggy right over there you just need to peck to actively open up access to. There's also several notes and a Mumbo token on the pipe below us that, hey, you might as well grab anyway because you're here. In the meanwhile, let's go back to talking about the game's staff rather briefly. I talked about Grant Kirkhope as well as Greg Males last time. Now let's talk about the additional game designer, George Andreas. They started at Rare as a QA tester on Ken Griffey Jr.'s winning run on the Super Nintendo, but then pretty immediately after that, they were in a lot of the more notable Rareware exclusive titles. Donkey Kong Land 2 on the Game Boy as a tester, Killer Instinct Gold as QA, tester on DKC 3, tester for GoldenEye, additional designer on Blast Corps, then they were additional game design on this main dev team for DK64, director of Cameo, Elements of Power on the 360, which is a little surprising. And then they were just listed as other ideas, Rare Family, and design for things like Viva Pinata, Nuts and Bolts, Connect Sports. Their most recent credit was as a senior creative director on PlayStation VR Worlds back in 2016. So we haven't seen them actively in the industry for about a decade at this point, seemingly, unless they're just involved in more of the business end. Next up is the chief keyboard tapper, or lead software engineer, Chris Sutherland, who started on the NES version of Battletoads as an uncredited graphics decoder. They were then a character voice in Killer Instinct. They were the head programmer of Donkey Kong Country 1, additional designer for Battletoads in the arcade, head programmer for DKC 2, special thanks in DKC 3. But their next major role was as character voices in Diddy Kong Racing. They were on this, of course, support team for DK64, main team for Banjo-Tooie. They were voices in the dark on Perfect Dark, so that means just voices in the background and all that jazz. But then they were actively another voice actor for Star Fox Adventures. They did vocals for Donkey Kong Country and the GBA. They were in the software team for Grabbed by the Ghoulies, voice talent for Cameo. That specific honeycomb piece took me a while to find on my first playthrough, by the way, because there are some greats in this game you can actively attack and interact with and break that look like they should be solid and unbreakable by most other game rules. But largely, if it looks like something is a little suspicious about it, if you hit it in some way, it'll probably open up and you can grab an item or find something like that. It's the other honeycomb in this level that's a real nightmare in terms of where it's placed. Going back to Chris Sutherland, though, the rest of their stay at Rare, they were largely on the producers and production side of the company, doing such for things like the Viva Pinata games, Connect Sports, but eventually they ended up leaving Rare and being one of the founding members of Playtonic, being the project director of Yooka-Laylee outright, and on the main team for Yooka-Laylee and the Impossible Lair. After him is the senior software engineers, or deputy key tappers, Morton Broderson, Paul J. Machacek, and Graham Smith. Broderson started on this game outright, but their most notable role after this largely was being the lead game designer for the PS2 game adaptation of the Polar Express movie. Paul J. Machacek started on Donsley on the Amstrad CPC, but their next major role after that was on WWF Superstars in the Game Boy, which was a Rare-developed LJN game, I believe. They were also on the dev team for Beetlejuice, another LJN Rareware title. But after that, they were a writer in some form for the various early Battletoads games, lead programming on Donkey Kong Land 1. In terms of main roles after Banjo-Kazooie, they were on the main team for Tooie. They were the producer for Diddy Kong Racing DS. They were the producer for Viva Pinata Pocket Paradise on the DS. And then they were largely with Rare up to modern day, where they were still a QA tester for the 2020 Battletoads game. And the final one of the three is Graham Smith, who started as a sound system and tools programmer over on GoldenEye. They were additional programming on Blast Core, they were on this. They were a DD sniper over on Perfect Dark, software engineer for Star Fox Adventures, and their most recent credit was the Xbox 360 release of Kazooie. Prior to that, they were on Rally Revo as a game engineer team member. At this point, I'm going for arguably the most dangerous part of Clanker's Cavern, the long underwater swims. In specific, there's a pipe somewhere down here that has a jiggy at the end of it, but the jiggy end is gated off, so you need to swim all the way through it to the jiggy, grab it, and leave all on one health bar underwater. And unlike, say, your main health bar, which can be extended by honeycombs, your oxygen meter never extends. So you need to be fast under there to get through it without dying. This is something I'd either recommend taking on first or doing absolutely last largely in any level that has something like it. Because if you do it first and die, that's not a lot of notes you have to reclaim. If you do it last and die, but already have like maybe over 85 to 90 notes within the level, frankly, you're probably good to move on because those last notes aren't going to matter too much in the long run because, in a way, not to talk too much about the exact numbers of it, this game is very kind in that in order to get a lot of the major rewards from collecting things, you don't need to get everything in the game. You need to get at most like 95% of everything, which I do appreciate that little level of forgiveness and margin of error.
Sip it, mutants, how we jigsaw is ours. Fight us you must.
Combat challenge for this is a bunch of these mutant crabs who, frankly, don't put up much of a fight. A good beak bomb when they're walking towards you will probably be enough to kill them in a lot of cases, but you can also do the roll, you can do the beak attack in midair with Kazooie. Combat in this game is kind of a secondary thought, in pretty much every definition of the word. Won't lie though, as satisfying as hell, taking out 2 enemies with 1 ground pound. It's also very graphically intensive because there's a lot of fragments there. Which, not for nothing, Banjo-Kazooie and especially Banjo-Tooie are probably 2 of the best looking games on the N64, both in terms of like the texture quality, but also just the animation quality. Defeating all the snippets causes the Jiggy to spawn in, and with that we can move on to the final Jiggy of this world. I went for this one before the final one just so I could grab the last few notes before anything could go really wrong. Because my need for 100% in my LPs really means I will do some weird things in some weird orders, I will not lie. Now, worth noting, one of my more minor complaints about Banjo-Kazooie and Tooie only worsened this, but at the same time it was also kind of a different ethos for Tooie in general. I kind of wish there was a way to more quickly leave a level than going back to the entrance pad, especially in a level like this where it might be a bit of a trek from wherever you are in Clanker's Cavern to go all the way back to the entrance pipe. But at the same time, that option would probably backfire whenever there's a level where you need to leave as a Mumbo transformation to get the Witch Switch Jiggy or anything else done in the surrounding portions of Gruntilda's lair, as you would probably automatically revert to Banjo even if it did take you back to the entrance. So ultimately, it not being there isn't a big deal. It just would have been kind of nice, especially given I know there were games at the time that did something like that. Hi, Spyro Trilogy. Won't lie, always a little weird in this game when you get your 10th Jiggy underwater or as a transformation. You can't actively see the dance. The dance is minor, but the dance is important. Only thing we have left to grab here is the second honeycomb piece, and I do a jump cut here because I actively couldn't remember where it was for a moment. You may have actively seen it while you were exploring around the level yourself though, as if you have a low enough camera angle you can see it. In specific, this pipe right here to the top right of the grate where the Jiggy we just got was, it's in a little crook hidden right there. If the camera's above that thing, it looks like you can't go up there, but the moment you go below it, you can just see it rotating around in there. That took me a while to find on my first playthrough, one of the more deviously hidden ones, and there's some deviously hidden ones all the same. With that, let's now speed our way on out of here and head on towards our next destination. But with that, I'm gonna need to end this off here. Thank you guys for watching, and in part 5 we're going to take a moment exploring around Gruntilda's lair to find the puzzle for the 4th world, and go on and enter it. See you guys then.